By this time the suitcase was getting very heavy, so I rested on a grassy knoll and took a peek inside. As I opened it, out burst a fountain of many-coloured butterflies, rainbow game counters, chess pieces, laughing cutlery, tiny chairs and tables, and flying plates covered with exotic fruit.
Welcome again to another segment of the Grassy Knoll. We're recording this on October 14th for later play. Our guest today is Sandra Uttley. She's written the book Dunblane Unburied, and probably not many of you know what happened there, and those who you might have encountered it somehow, some way, probably have forgotten it. It's about 10 years ago, I believe. But anyway, we're going to have Sandra on with us today for the express purpose of telling us what took place there. And we're going to be touching upon a couple of these incidents where it involved these kind of mass murders, and that would also include Columbine and Port Arthur. Sandra, thank you very much for coming on. And how's everything going over there in the UK?
Well, we're getting into the winter now, and it's not very, very pleasant. But I'm here to speak about Dunblane, so I'm quite happy to not talk about the weather, which us English people do all the time.
I can't do a thing about.
We can't do anything about. So, yes, thank you for inviting me on to talk about Dunblane. It's not an opportunity I get very often in Britain. In fact, not at all. It's one of those tragedies that's been brushed under the carpet. And I imagine, as a consequence, people in America probably won't have heard too much about it over the last 10 years, because if there's nothing in the British media, there's not going to be anything filtering out to the States either. But yes, it was on the 13th of March in 1996, what I consider to be the Western world's worst massacre. A man called Thomas Hamilton walked into Dunblane Primary School. This is the story we were told, but the result of what happened that day, 16 5-year-old children were shot dead, and their teacher, and 12 children were injured, some critically, and a further 3 teachers were injured. We're talking about a full class full, 28 children gunned down. 9:30 in the morning, they'd just come out of assembly, changed into the gym kit, and they were in the gym warming up when this man walked in and started firing at them.
Now, your connection to this situation was, I guess we would call what your occupation was at the time, we would call it here an EMT. You were on the shift, I guess, the second shift or the shift after the incident took place.
Yes, fortunately I wasn't on shift on the Wednesday morning. I was due back at work on the Wednesday evening, so I didn't get that call. And that's something I do like to stress, because sometimes it is reported that I was in the gym and I dealt with the injured children, and that isn't true. And I am, keen to make sure that my involvement is recorded properly. I was called in to relieve my colleagues. My ambulance station, Callender Ambulance Station, which is 9 miles north of Dunblane, received the first call. So they were the first paramedics on scene and declared it a major incident. And then obviously, as a result of what they'd been involved in that morning, they were relieved of duties for the rest of the day and went for debriefing. So I was called in to take over the shift along with another colleague. So I feel, yes, I do know directly the devastating effect that what happened in that gym had on all the people who were involved in whatever way, from the nursery teacher who was called in to identify all the dead children. I mean, this woman is completely traumatized. She knew a lot of the children from the year before. They'd been in her nursery class. And, of course, the children's teacher was dead. So this woman was the only person that could identify the children. And then, as I say, my ambulance colleagues, severely traumatized by what they witnessed, having to walk in, assessing who was dead, who was close to death and could be given a chance of life by taking them to hospital, and they made an assessment to take one particular girl called Mary Macbeth to hospital. She'd had one gunshot wound to her head, but she was dead on arrival. So 15 of the children died in the gym, and Mary died in the ambulance on the way to the hospital. And then their duties continued. They had to go back and ferry the injured children to the hospital. And that went on, of course, for a good few hours. Because you're talking about such a huge number of, critically injured children. And some of them had to be airlifted to Glasgow Hospital because the hospital in Stirling just wasn't equipped for dealing with this sort of injury. I mean, Dunblane and Stirling, if you don't know Scotland, it's really just a little backwater. It's, it was just completely out of the blue that something like this happened. I mean, the shock wave from it has just gone on and on, really, for the last 10 years. And when the massacre happened with the Amish school children, I mean, you can just imagine, the peaceful, quiet lives they're living, and something like this, it's like suddenly you're in a war zone. It really just shook everybody so badly. And yeah, for me personally, the repercussions have gone on a lot longer because I did start a relationship with a man whose daughter was killed in the massacre. His wife had died a few years earlier, and he'd been left to bring up Sophie on his own. And so we can imagine the devastation for him. And we got together a few months after the massacre, and I basically feel like I gave a good 7 years, really helping him pick up the pieces, try and live some kind of a normal life, if that's possible, after an incident like that.
How much does the specter of what took place that day still hang about Dunblane?
Well, I left Dunblane 3 years ago, and I would say the reason that I left was because I felt I didn't want to live with the memory of it really for the rest of my life. I was 36 when the massacre happened, and Mick by then had become involved in gun control work and was travelling abroad a lot, and I was very much left in charge of, taking care of his daughter's grave and putting flowers on the graves of all the other children when it was the birthdays and Christmas, etc. And I just felt this was no way for me to spend the rest of my life because it was like walking on eggshells all the time. I mean, so much money poured into Dunblane, and this became a source of incredible tension. I mean, money came from America, Australia, several £1 million worth of money that was distributed amongst the bereaved and the injured. And it just caused a massive amount of resentment. Nothing could be done at all in Dunblane without there being some reference to, the massacre. So you couldn't, I don't feel it was possible to ever try and resume a normal life living somewhere like that. I also personally know that a lot of people who were maybe perhaps more on the fringes of it, like a friend of Mick's who had been the carer for Sophie after Sophie's mother had died. I mean, she became very, very ill in the last few years, and there have been suicides, and I just don't see how communities can really ever go back to what they were. Dunblane really tried hard to brush it all under the carpet, to change the kind of flavour of the town that it is. I mean, loads of big housing estates have been built on the outskirts of Dunblane. It's commuterville for the big cities like Edinburgh and Glasgow. And so there is this attempt to push it away. But I just don't think you can do that with that kind of trauma.
So it's a growing community, and perhaps the thought is that in enlarging it and increasing the population and kind of, I guess maybe more suburbanizing it, that maybe they can put somewhat of a facade over everything.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people felt that Dunblane needed new blood, and in a sense I was old blood because I'd been there when it happened. I felt particularly aggrieved about particular aspects of both the way the incident was handled and the following inquiry and the cover-up, I believe, that took place. And they didn't want people like me around that were going to still make a noise about what had happened, even though to my mind what I was doing, searching for the truth, was vital for healing.
Mm-hmm.
That's not the way people in Dunblane really saw it, and I think they wanted to basically, I suppose it's a bit like a blood transfusion, people moved out, put new people in who haven't had anything to do with Dunblane, either prior to the massacre or when the massacre happened, or the immediate aftermath. And it's not the place it was when I was living there. I was living in a small part of Dunblane. It was an old weaving hamlet called Vermoil, and it was a very attractive place to live. But now it is really just like a sort of dormitory town. I don't know if that's a term you would use in the States. But as I say, just massive sort of buildings went on and attracted obviously quite a wealthy group of people. I mean, you're looking at houses that were costing, at least £250,000 minimum.
Well, we'd call them bedroom communities, and so the concept that you're giving us is you're very well impressed upon us over here in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
I would even tell you also, for nothing, I mean, we're outside the city of Tampa in Florida, and that's exactly what's happening here. Now, we never had an event, but so what's taking place there, whether it was natural or more or less coerced, certainly...
I think it was speeded up.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Now, how many years did you spend in Dunblane? I mean, did you grow up there? Was that your childhood town?
No, I'm actually English by birth. I lived in England, Yorkshire, until I was 20, and I moved up to Scotland to do nursing when I was 20. That was back in 1980. And I ended up living, Dunblane is about 40 miles from Edinburgh and Glasgow. And I ended up moving to central Scotland when I went to university at Stirling in the early 80s. Mm-hmm. So I lived in and around Dunblane for really good 20 years. I'd just moved into Dunblane itself, into a little flat in the town just about under a year before the massacre happened. So it had been, all my adult life, it had been my home for all my adult life, and I hadn't really ever had any plans to come back to England. But as I say, I think after the massacre happened, I felt that I didn't want to spend my life in that place.
What now? I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say it's a bit ironic because I haven't really left Dunblane behind, have I? Because I've written this book. I've been campaigning for a new inquiry for the last 4 years. I've now set up my own website to expose all the lies that were told at the Dunblane inquiry. So in a sense, I've physically left, but obviously emotionally, I'm still there.
When did you complete the book, Dunblane Unburied?
In March of this year. My aim had been, it was the 10th anniversary of the massacre in March this year, and I had thought then that this is the time for me to stop, because the British media just will not cover anything about the Dunblane cover-up. They are, to my mind, complicit in it now. And I just thought, well, I've got to find a way to move on with my life, and I've got all this material I've gathered over 4 years, well, 3.5 years at that point, and I thought the only way that I can come to terms with all the work I've done and that's been ignored is to put it into a book. And that was going to be the end of it for me. But of course, like any action you take, there's always going to be some kind of response to this action. And of course, I ended up then reaching a lot of people who were just so pleased that I'd done this, that I'd documented material from original inquiry documents that most people, well, the majority of people just did not get copies of. The press didn't get copies of. I was put in this very unique position in that I came across these original documents which proved to me, and these were summaries of witness statements taken by the police after the massacre. And when I then started comparing what was in these witness statements with what these witnesses said at the inquiry, I started to see where the lies were. and where the inconsistencies were. And once that becomes blatantly obvious to you, I don't think that you can... Well, I morally didn't feel I could turn my back on that.
So you realized something was wrong just by following the inquiries at the trial or whatever after the fact?
Yeah, at the time, the inquiry happened very soon after the massacre. I mean, the massacre happened on the 13th of March, as I say, and the inquiry began on May the 29th. The parents were obviously still completely shocked and numb and grief-stricken. And I don't know that many of them attended the inquiry. And it was a long inquiry. It went on until the middle of July. And it was obviously intended to reassure the British public that this was being properly examined, to make sure that nothing like this ever happened again. But when you start to study the evidence, you actually see that it was just really a bureaucratic device. It was a deliberate. It was a piece of theatre. Mm-hmm. It was deliberately done, and it was done so quickly to keep everybody quiet. Because what I can see has happened through my contact with people in Australia over the last few months who have been researching the Port Arthur massacre, which happened less than 6 weeks after the Dunblane massacre. They've been denied an inquiry, and they've had people agitating and being involved in campaigning about the truth about Port Arthur for the last 10 years, which we've just not seen in Britain. And I think that's because the British government, in a sense, probably in terms of pacifying the population, handled it extremely well. I mean, to have this inquiry, to give the appearance that everything was all legal and above board, and that the grief of everybody was being taken seriously. And it worked for a good few years. Most of us were quiet, and we didn't make a noise about what had gone on. Mostly because we weren't aware. I think the first awareness, the few of us that are involved in campaigning for a new inquiry for Dunblane, and I say a few, there's literally probably half a dozen of us, and it was one chap up in Scotland, a guy called William Scott, who in 1999, he found out that the Dunblane inquiry documents had been locked away for 100 years, which is totally unprecedented. I mean, even war cabinet papers aren't locked away for more than 30 years. And I read about this at the time, but I mean, in some respects, I think I must be very naive, because it hadn't even occurred to me that this 100-year closure order could be challenged. But William Scott challenged it. And of course, they started telling him lies in the answers they gave him. The first answer I think he got about why these documents had been locked away for 100 years was to protect the identity of children. But which children? Mm-hmm. And in these documents amount to hundreds of thousands of pages, and there can't possibly be children's names on every single page. And there's also names can be blacked out with felt tip pens. So the excuses he started being given just made him more and more suspicious. And I mean, I really have to hand it to this chap. He has done an incredible job. He's battled on for 7 years. I only got involved at the end of 2002 and was put in contact with William at the beginning of 2003, and we've worked together ever since. So, he's been working twice the length of time as I have. And in fact, he's just in the process of doing a mail shot to every single British MP, every Scottish MP in the Scottish Parliament, and every member of the House of Lords, looking for support for a new inquiry.
But Sandra, what happened, if I could ask you, that when people, as you said, kind of walked away, buying what the commission had stated or come up with, what made it start to fall apart years after the fact?
I think Lord Burton asking a question in the House of Lords in 1999. I mean, I know I've just said this, but I'm just giving a bit more detail.
Okay.
He asked specifically for a copy of a report on Thomas Hamilton by a DS Paul Hughes to be put in the House of Lords library. And the answer he received, which of course is documented in Hansard, the official government records, was that this couldn't be done because these documents were locked away for 100 years. That, I think, so it was 3 years after Dunblane before people started thinking, well, hang on a minute, why 100 years? But as I say, it was still another 2 years before I got involved, and that was purely by accident. But then, because I worked for Mick, I mean, I did gun control research for Mick North, whose daughter was killed.
Mm-hmm.
And I was his housekeeper, his personal assistant, as I say, a researcher for him as well. So I had access to all the material he had. There was never any problem about it. It wasn't under lock and key or anything.
Mm-hmm.
And it was through reading documents that he'd been given at the inquiry. As I say, that was at the end of 2002. And I don't actually think he, at that point, had ever read them, because, as I say, the inquiry started so soon after the massacre happened. I think he put them in a box and forgot about them. And he's perhaps one of the few of the bereaved parents that even has copies of the original documents. Because, you know, he's a scientist, he collects things, you know, he collates information. When I read these, I just thought that this isn't the story we were told. I mean, the biggest example that jumped out at me very quickly was that the CCTV evidence showed Thomas Hamilton leaving Stirling, where he lived, which was only about 5 miles from Dunblane. The actual police officer who gave evidence about the CCTV times and directions stated that Hamilton left Stirling at 12 minutes past 9, which would have to be the time he would have left to have got to Dunblane Primary School for 9:30, which is when he arrived. But in the summary of this witness statement of this police officer, it was quite clear that Hamilton left Stirling at 08:44 and 08:46. So I started writing to the Lord Advocate for an explanation of why these times had been altered. And this was prior to the Freedom of Information Act coming in, which basically meant that the Lord Advocate could take his time about answering questions. There's time limits now. Do you have a Freedom of Information Act? I'm sure you do.
No, we do, yeah. Mm-hmm. We call it FOIA, F-O-I-A.
Mm-hmm. Right, well, FOI, yes, that's what I call it.
That's what you guys have, yep. Mm-hmm.
And he just wouldn't answer this question, so I had to get my MP to badger the Lord Advocate for a response to this. And in the end, the reply I got after 2 years, I wondered how they were going to get around this. And the Lord Advocate came back and said, oh yes, DC Graham Capes made a mistake in his evidence. Well, if you read the transcript of the inquiry, you can see that whenever a witness said something that the Lord Advocate didn't like or gave an incorrect answer, they were jumped on. I mean, but this DC Capes was basically just given free rein to say whatever he wanted. I mean, he must have been granted some kind of immunity before he went into the witness box, because his evidence is just packed full of lies. And this is the most important, to my mind. If this had been an ordinary crime, for want of a better expression, with a potential murderer apprehended, CCTV evidence would be the most vital evidence that would be used in court. But they've just made a mockery of the whole justice system in this inquiry. And what was inconvenient, because it's extremely inconvenient for them that Hamilton set off 45 minutes before he arrived at Dunblane Primary School, because it clearly indicates he went somewhere first, or he met with somebody.
When you say you have CCTV evidence, is there a video of him?
It was captured on video. I have the police witness statement, and I haven't obviously got a copy of the CCTV, but the police have, because the camera numbers are recorded in this statement. The camera numbers and the times and the direction. They're at a particular roundabout in Stirling where his van was sighted leaving Stirling.
But why was there video going on? I mean, is this part of the total?
We have CCTV cameras everywhere. We're basically being watched.
Okay, now it's making sense. All right, so you're under almost complete video surveillance over there, huh?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, I have inquired about whether there was any other CCTV sightings of Hamilton once he'd left Stirling, and right before arriving at Dunblane. But there wouldn't have been, because he would have just. I mean, it's not a big city. There wouldn't have probably been anywhere else that there would have been cameras. And that said, he quite clearly didn't take a direct route. And so by then, I suppose once the Crown Office realised that I'd got access to information I was never meant to get. Mm-hmm. And you have to remember, this was in a document that had been locked away for 100 years. I was never meant to know this.
Right.
The bereaved parents were told if they raised any concerns following the inquiry, well, you had these documents at the time, they were told. If you didn't raise any issues back then, you're not in a position to raise any issues now. So that left me as an ordinary individual mm-hmm. to raise this. But then, of course, they say, well, you're not directly affected. So they've got a cop-out everywhere.
Right. Mm-hmm.
But these are documents, as I say, that were locked away for 100 years. Now, if nobody had questioned that, and these documents had stayed locked away for 100 years, somebody like me probably would have gone and examined them, 100 years from now. But what would they be able to do? Because all the witnesses would be dead.
Well, that's the idea. Mm-hmm.
The truth would have been lost to history
right.
completely.
Well, that's the idea, isn't it?
Well, that is exactly the idea. That was their plan.
Even when we had the situation, and of course we've had two famous commissions. One is the Warren Commission that supposedly investigated the Kennedy assassination, and of course of late we've had the 9/11 Commission. But we all realize that all commissions do is go ahead and tell people what the government wants them to believe. Nothing really is done, and I'm assuming that's more or less what happened with the Dunblane inquiry. Is that correct?
Well, that's what is very apparent now. Yes. I mean, I think there are people that feel the same way about the Piper Alpha inquiry, and that was the same Judge Lord Cullen who oversaw that inquiry. That was an oil rig disaster, and that was off the coast of Scotland, mm-hmm. and also the Lockerbie case.
Oh yeah.
I mean, I think we're slow off the mark in Britain. I mean, from things I read on the internet, I mean, the fact that in America you've so quickly taken on board that perhaps you weren't told the truth about 9/11. Mm-hmm. We haven't been so quick off the mark with big tragedies in Britain. As I say, when I'm talking with some of the people in Australia about their research about Port Arthur, I mean, they're years ahead of me. They've been doing this ever since, the massacre happened. Mm-hmm. British people were completely, it's a stiff upper lip and everything, and we have to get over it and move on. And
yeah.
And
that's on my end. Don't worry about it.
Sorry?
No, what you're hearing, that interruption, is on my end, Sandra.
Well, you're probably hearing a lot of interruption at this end as well, because my dog's woken up.
Well, I'll tell you what.
And he's running up and down the stairs.
Well, here's what we'll do. We're at the bottom of the hour, so we'll take a break, and you can deal with Fido, and we'll pick this up on the other side. Would that be okay?
That's fine, yes. Okay.
Okay. All right, we're back at the Grassy Knoll. We have with us today Sandra Uttley. She's written a book entitled Dunblane Unburied. And we'll pick up more with the storyline in a second. But Sandra, as far as information about the incident, websites, the book that you have, where can people find it and purchase it?
The book can be purchased through Amazon online, but I believe that they take about 4 to 6 weeks to get it out to customers.
Okay.
So the easiest way is to order it directly from me, actually. I can process orders. If anybody wanted to contact me by email, my email address is sandrauttley@aol.com, and the book is priced $9.99. postage to the States, I think, is approximately £5. I'm afraid I can't do a currency translation there for you. But if anybody wanted to order a book directly from me in Britain, we can take orders with using credit card and debit card. I think it's the cheapest way to order.
Okay. Also, I tell you what, even though I'll post this on the website, and they can hit your email from there, what I'm going to ask you to do just now, though, is spell out Uttley, because obviously there's a couple of ways that can be done.
Uttley is spelled U-T-T-L-E-Y.
Okay.
As I say, it's Sandra Uttley. It's all one word with no dot in there. Nice and easy to remember.
Okay.
At AOL.com. But yes, if you could put that up on your...
I will do that. And the website now that they can...
website address, www.dunblaneunburied.co.uk.
Okay.
I trust you'll put that up as well for me.
You know I will.
Thank
you know I will.
Thank you.
I wouldn't dare not. Getting back to the storyline, too, one of the things we've not spoken about is the profile of the shooter. His name was Thomas Hamilton, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Could you just give us a thumbnail, more or less, of how he was portrayed, either accurately or otherwise, by the media?
Well, actually, I do think the media portrayal of him was probably pretty accurate. He was a very seedy, disgusting character, really. He was a known paedophile. He, at the time of committing the massacre, if indeed he did commit the massacre, he was 43 years old. He lived in a small flat in Stirling, was unemployed, but basically seemed to make a reasonable income out of, well, I believe this, selling images of children.
Okay.
And he ran endless boys' clubs every night of the week, boys of a particular age, boys of a particular size. You know, he wouldn't have fat boys in his club. He wouldn't have tall boys in his club. He had very specific favourite boys. He photographed them, and there were thousands of negatives and photographs found in his house, but I actually believe that most of the really incriminating ones were seized by the police on the day, because there were definitely police in his house within about an hour of the massacre happening. Photographers who have been to take my photograph or anything to do with the book have told me, you know, we were there on the day. The police moved into that house very quickly. He was undoubtedly a supplier of child pornography and had a lot of connections with a lot of people. As I say, he wasn't a wealthy man. He was quite the opposite. He lived in a dingy little flat, and yet he had lots of male visitors, well-dressed men, arriving in large, flashy cars every day. I went to see his neighbours before I left Dunblane to speak to them about this and other aspects of Thomas Hamilton's life, because it was a very closely confined little street, and because they would all know each other's business. And Mrs. Ogilvy, who gave evidence at the inquiry, I mean, she told me quite categorically, Thomas Hamilton's male visitors continued coming right up until the day before the massacre, whereas every man that was called to give evidence at the inquiry, you know, as an acquaintance, as they all called themselves, an acquaintance of Thomas Hamilton, they all claimed they hadn't seen him for about 6 weeks to 2 months. But Mrs. Ogilvy told me that was just nonsense. I mean, he wasn't a loner. Lord Cullen certainly tried to portray him as a loner, and the media did. That's where I think it fits in with other gun massacres, that that's how they have to portray these men. But Thomas Hamilton they probably weren't friends as you and I might think of people as friends, but he was certainly connected to an awful lot of people, because he was supplying a service. I mean, you have to remember, he was probably most active as a supplier of child pornography in the pre-internet era, where, you know, demand was so great that he was just everybody's friend. Every paedophile in Scotland wanted to know Thomas Hamilton.
All right, so the situation with Hamilton then. Now, I just want to get back to one thing, just to clarify, that he was filmed by CCTV cameras.
Well, the van he was driving was, but I don't suppose CCTV cameras would be clear enough to identify the driver. But the van, he hired a van the day before, and the van that he was driving was picked up on the CCTV camera with the registration number of the van he hired. That is all definite, and that's confirmed.
And that's also, the timestamp on that was a little after 8 a.m.?
Oh, it was 08:44 and 08:46. But then if you read Lord Cullen's report, which was supposed to be the definitive account of the Dunblane massacre, he ignores all the evidence about neighbours that saw Thomas Hamilton at, say, 8:40, just before he set off. And he refers to one witness, another neighbour, saying that Hamilton was scraping ice or snow off the van, at 8:15. And, he quite clearly didn't set off till 8:40, but so there's the time scales of all, they've just been blurred. Which is part, if you don't want the truth to come out, then I suppose that's what you're going to do, because most people probably didn't even buy a copy of the Cullen report and read it. It's not a particularly exciting document to read.
But the official account has him leaving at somewhere, like you said, a half an hour before the incident?
The official account, the police officer that gave evidence, he actually said 12 minutes past 9.
All right, so now...
I don't know if I'm probably not making this very clear, and I think part of the problem when I'm talking about it is if you don't know the area and you know the distance and how long it would take, it's maybe not seeming very significant, but it is hugely significant. As I say, I lived in that area for over 20 years. I know that roundabout very well, and I know as well that the van took an exit off that roundabout that went in completely the opposite direction to Dunblane, and yet the police officer was asked when Hamilton's van was seen by these cameras, did he exit on the road to Dunblane? And the officer said yes. Well, that was another lie. He actually doubled back on himself, and as if he was going up to a place called Bannockburn.
Well, now, this is not insignificant in the sense of what he might have done in that time in between might have been in preparation for what was to come. Is that correct?
I think he was meeting with somebody. I feel that I think he was definitely the designated driver for that day. And there was somebody else involved. All right, now,
he is being, he was convicted in a sense of being the lone gunman. And this is why you said designated driver, that there was somebody else. As you now know, was there an unidentified individual that was just assumed to be Hamilton because of the way the person was dressed?
Well, that's right. We have absolutely no way of being 100% sure that this man was Hamilton. He was dead, so there wasn't going to be an identity parade. The man who witnesses say they saw getting out of the van when he parked at the school, there was a local woman. She said this man had a woolly hat pulled down to his eyebrows. He had large, dark-framed glasses on, and he had a jacket zipped up right to his chin. This wasn't, showing any facial features at all. And in fact, when there were sort of drawings of the gunman in the press in the days afterwards, it was quite an anonymous image. You would never be able to identify whether it was Thomas Hamilton or anybody else. And the two teachers who were shot and injured, who of course say, Hamilton walked into the gym and he started firing at them immediately. Both of these women have admitted they never knew Hamilton. They wouldn't have known what he looked like. They hadn't had any dealings with him.
Do you think they're...
Sorry?
No, could their testimony have been coerced?
No, I don't think it would have been coerced. They would have been deeply traumatised. They were both shot.
Mm-hmm.
They went off to a storeroom off the gym to hide. I think that when they were recovering in hospital and they were told the gunman was this Thomas Hamilton, why would they have any reason to doubt that?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Would they?
But they didn't no one witnessed the actual murders taking place. Is that correct?
Well, there's one witness who claims that he saw Thomas Hamilton kill himself, and this was a student teacher who claims he didn't give evidence at the inquiry, though. And it's hard to really know what to make of his evidence. But no, there were no. I mean, as I said, a teacher who was a class teacher was killed.
Right.
Most of the children in the gym were dead. The other children that were in the gym were critically injured. There's only one child that survived that whole incident with no gunshot injury at all. A little girl called Victoria Porteous, who lay down and pretended she was dead.
Gee.
And she just didn't move. But she saw what was going on. And I have a copy of her parents' witness statement that was given to their lawyer. Again, that was a document that was meant to have been locked away for 100 years, and nobody was meant to read it. And this girl, Victoria, quite clearly saw what was going on. And she gave a statement to her parents, who recounted it to their solicitor, that actually makes a comment about when this man entered the gym. But somebody fired into the bottom end of the gym where Hamilton entered the gym. But so much of the statement is blanked out. Mm-hmm. So it's actually very hard to make sense of. But it's not just names that's blanked out. There's actually the real gist of what is in that statement has been removed. But they've left one word in. They should have probably taken out the word Hamilton, because when they said, he fired into the bottom end of the gym where Hamilton entered the gym, just gave away so much. And these parents also made in their statement that they observed when they went to the gym to see the scene of crime afterwards, which all the parents were invited to do. They saw 2 bullet holes in the bottom end of the gym where Hamilton was said to have committed suicide that were 6 inches from the ground and 2 inches apart. And we know from what the scene of crime officer says that Hamilton was supposedly, when he shot himself through the roof of his mouth, the scene of crime officer says the bullet exited the top of Hamilton's head, but the pathologist says it exited from behind his left ear. And if you look at that, fitting in with what the statement of the uninjured child said, it really does lead to the conclusion that Hamilton was shot and killed on scene. Right. And that then leads to a whole host of other questions.
Right.
Because if we were told he committed suicide and he didn't, then that alone requires explanation. I mean, even for all that he'd committed, if he did commit this evil act, the man still deserved to stand trial. And I would also claim that his death has added to the trauma, because we've no explanation for why this happened.
Now, the thing is, if he in turn was murdered, obviously you're going to have an exit wound from, I would assume, you're going to have an entrance wound from other than, I would say, his mouth. Is there any kind of confliction with the forensics that would state...
Sorry, the pathologist's report is really very ambiguous, and I've been using Freedom of Information to try and get answers from the pathologist who supposedly carried out the post-mortem on Thomas Hamilton. But I've come to the conclusion that it was just a falsified report. It doesn't even, the actual description of the body, I've got the full autopsy report now, and the description doesn't even fit Hamilton. I don't believe that it was another body. You start getting, conspiracy after conspiracy here, but it does make you wonder whether, given that if Hamilton was murdered, whether they even bothered with the post-mortem, and they just filled out, a form. Because if they didn't want the truth to come out that he'd been killed, then in a sense, why bother doing a post-mortem? And interestingly, after I really put on the pressure with freedom of information at the end of last year, Professor Vyzygoth from Edinburgh University, who shouldn't have even been doing the post-mortem, I mean, he had a contract to work for the Crown Office, but not for the Stirling area. He just suddenly resigned last December. And I think that he knew that his falsified post-mortem report was catching up with him.
Now, the bullet holes that were at the bottom of the wall, the wall through which Hamilton passed, obviously through a door.
Through a fire exit door, yeah.
Okay. Now, does that mean that there might have been... let me ask you what you think. Do you believe that Hamilton shot at all? Or do you believe there were two shooters? Or how do you make out what happened?
For really most of the last 4 years, I did believe Hamilton had committed the massacre, but that he'd been killed on scene. But I haven't been able to get any satisfactory explanations for that. You know, why would that have happened? How could it happen? I mean, if the massacre was over within 3 minutes, as we were told, how did this person get there so quick and kill him? And why did they kill him? But of late, as I say, I've been going back over all the evidence, and I now actually really seriously wonder whether Hamilton had the capability to commit that massacre. This was kind of like almost a skilled, trained soldier. You know, the speed with which he walked through that gym and disabled the children and stood over them and shot them through the head. This gunman was going for the highest death count possible.
And with a certain degree of precision, too.
Absolutely.
When you say
Hamilton was not, he wasn't even a competition shooter. You know, he actually, that's one of the reasons why I always say he held his firearms illegally, because he didn't meet any of the requirements to be allowed to have firearms. But the police are supposed to do regular checks to ensure that handgun owners are using them for the stated purpose they put in their application, i.e. target shooting, competitions. Hamilton wasn't a competition shooter. He wasn't even a particularly good shooter, apparently. And he wasn't a fit man either. I mean, that's the other thing. He was fat. He was very unhealthy. This sort of military precision of what happened in that gym, it just doesn't, I can't see it now being Hamilton. I think he was the patsy.
Did Hamilton ever have any business around the school? Was anybody familiar with him at all? Or was this strictly right out of the blue with this individual probably?
He did have connections with Dunblane, yes. But he had connections really all over central Scotland. Because he used the gyms, you see, in the schools to run his clubs.
And was Dunblane's gymnasium one of them?
Well, they tried to make out that had never been the case, that he never had used Dunblane Primary School. But one witness did give evidence saying that Hamilton had used Dunblane Primary School gym, but he certainly used Dunblane High School gym up until the end. And the other thing about these clubs, though, as well, that these clubs were really just a way of Hamilton getting boys
networking,
into his clutches, so that he could take them away on summer camps. That was where he really enacted most of his, disgusting paedophilic activities. I mean, when I say that, I'm not particularly sure that he laid a finger on boys other than physically hurting them. I think he was quite sadistic. But I'm not sure that he sexually abused any of the boys. I think they were mostly fodder for his photography.
Did no one know that this was going on?
Yes, they did. Yes. There were junior police officers who tried to get Hamilton stopped over and over and again. I mean, there's a lot of detail about this in my book. There's several chapters about it. It's mind-boggling. I mean, you just couldn't imagine a similar situation where a man with that kind of reputation was allowed year after year to take the young boys away to a remote island, take them away from the parents. He took all the pocket money away from them. He took all the clothes away from them when they got there, and they had to dress in just little shorts for the whole time. Now, if you've ever been to Scotland, you don't even have a summer in Scotland, not even in summer. And these kids were running around in shorts, and he had photography sessions where he put his special boys into red swimming trunks.
Not that this is that important, but I got to ask you because I'm just curious. When you talk about boys' clubs and such, I mean, usually, I remember back in the old days up in New York and stuff, there were boys' clubs, and they would revolve around activities, many of them sports. How did he sell what he was doing? What was the attraction there, at least on the surface?
He claimed they were gymnastic clubs.
Right, okay.
But you see, he didn't, that was another part of Hamilton's history that was covered up at the inquiry, and again that I only found out about through these documents. Hamilton didn't even have any appropriate gymnastic qualifications. And there were people who complained all the time that he stretched the boys too far. He worked them too hard. Mm-hmm. These were young kids. They were 5 to sort of 9 years old. And when I saw in these documents that I found 3 years ago that the only gymnastic qualification he had was a Women's Artistic Assistant Award. So I wrote to the national body, the British Amateur Gymnastics Association, and I said, can you confirm for me that Thomas Hamilton held a Grade 5 Women's Assistant Artistic Award? And they wrote back and they said yes. And I said, and did that qualify him to coach boys? They said no, he wasn't qualified to coach boys, and he certainly wasn't qualified to coach them alone. And that was all covered up at the inquiry. There's a 20-year history on this man. It's scandalous.
Well, now, let me start putting this together a bit.
You've got to read my book.
Yep. And, but now it starts to look like, and this is not unusual, because we have our own situation here in the States, Sandra, where we have what they call the Bohemian Club. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
I haven't heard of that, no.
And that's where the rich and powerful go, and reports are from those who have penetrated the facility and have pretty accurately documented what went on, that you have these people who feel they are, and perhaps they are, in fact, beyond the reach of the law, mm-hmm. that they get involved in the most debauched behavior you can imagine or don't want to imagine. Mm-hmm. Now I'm starting to think that, is it possible that some government officials were hooked into him?
Yes.
All right.
Absolutely. And in fact, there was a newspaper report a couple of weeks ago that was about it was a murder of a young girl about 20 or 30 years ago, and the report was actually about this girl and the man who allegedly killed her. But there's a mention in this article about a network that operated in Scotland who called themselves the Untouchables, and Hamilton was part of this network. He was a driver. He was a driver particularly for a senior police officer with Central Scotland Police, who he took to sex clubs and other events around Scotland. Yes, that's the cover-up is you can understand why they had to cover up all this about Thomas Hamilton. This was a man who was getting away with murder long before the murders on the 13th of March.
Well, if some powerful people were dealing with him for their own tawdry interests.
He was a supplier.
Yeah.
I think he wasn't just a supplier of images, of pornography. I think he supplied boys as well. Because the area, it's a classic case. Paedophilia is now sort of moving out to the poorer countries, isn't it? We have that old rock star, Gary Glitter, who's taken himself off to Thailand. And we've seen that now that, as the West is becoming more aware of the whole spectre of paedophilia, paedophiles are moving out to target more vulnerable children. Yeah. But during Hamilton's reign, as I call it, in the 1970s to 1980s, right up until the massacre in the mid-1990s, the boys that he targeted to come into his clubs were from the poor villages. Mm-hmm. That part of central Scotland's got lots of tiny little, old mining villages with lots of, not neglected children, but, maybe where the parents aren't keeping an eye on them as much as more middle-class parents do. And they went off to these clubs and then went off to these camps where they were basically terrorised.
Yeah.
And I think, yes, Hamilton was involved with a network of people in the Scottish judiciary. I mean, the Scottish Crown Office have gone out of their way to keep the truth about Thomas Hamilton's background and the truth about the massacre concealed. You have to ask why, don't you?
Well, if it were determined by the higher-ups that now he might become an embarrassment or it was a good time to make this all go away, you can understand why they might want to terminate him. But now you get involved and it's like, okay, well, why do we have to do this in a school with children? And there's some more yardage that's gotten out of this in a sense. Also, with regard to gun control and control over people in general. Now, we only have a couple of minutes left, but I did want to touch upon one thing that we have talked about on the side, and that is you are starting to realize as you network with people like Andrew McGregor, let's say, in Australia, perhaps with our conversations, that this may have fit a pattern that is taking place globally and is not so much an isolated incident.
Yeah, I mean, that's, again, I think I've been quite naive. I've resisted this argument for quite a long time. I mean, when the shooters in Great Britain, obviously, immediately there was the handgun ban after Dunblane, and these guys, nearly 60,000 of them, are still very aggrieved, and understandably so. They were made out to have been guilty of this crime, when clearly they weren't. And they gave me all this stuff about how it had been the intention of the British government to disarm the population, from the beginning of the last century. And I just kept thinking, no government could be so evil to allow the massacre of children. I just couldn't compute it. It just wouldn't work in my head. But then, as you say, I'm now networking more with people who have been researching massacres in other countries. I look at my ex-partner Mick North's involvement with gun control and how he has to have been brainwashed in some way, because I've talked to him, sort of almost for 3 years solid about my research and my findings, and you would think as a parent he would want to know the truth about his daughter's murder. But instead, it's just something that it's pushing on one side, because he's very much now working on the agenda of GCN, Gun Control Network, and IANSA, which is based in the States, I believe, International Action Network on Small Arms.
I'm not familiar with them.
Yeah, that's the US based. I think it started out from Britain. It's funded by, I think he's originally Hungarian, George Soros.
Oh, yeah, you got it.
He funds IANSA, and I just have to wonder whether Mick's now being brainwashed, because how can he turn his back on the truth?
Right. Well, if Soros is involved with it and his globalist ideas, then this is not a good thing. That's for sure.
Mick and GCN are very heavily involved with Soros. Very.
Not a good sign. Well, we're also coming up against the top of the hour and at the end of our time together. Sandra, one more time, how people can buy the book, and also tell them about the website.
Well, as I say, I hope you're going to put it up on your website, but if anybody wants to email me immediately, my email address is Sandra Uttley, UTTLEY, @AOL.com. My website address is www.dunblaneunburied.co.uk, and I can also be emailed through the website as well. And there's details about the book on my website.
Okay. Also,
hopefully you'll be able to reach me if you want a copy of the book.
Without a doubt. I also want to say, Sandra, stay on the line if you will, because I'm going to bid the audience goodbye. And I just want to touch base with you before we break the connection.
Please fasten your seatbelts.